If true, such conduct could institute violations of federal civil rights law.
The WNBA's leadership just got the most brutal, unavoidable wake-up call in the history of the league. And Caitlin Clark is at the absolute center of it. The establishment that runs this organization has spent months watching their brightest star get hip-checked, poked in the eye, and struck in the throat. And they did nothing. Nothing. They stayed silent. They let it happen. And now the federal government of the United States of America is looking directly at Commissioner Cathy Engelbert and saying, "Fix this, or we will fix it for you." Welcome back. This is Rim Run, and today we are ripping the doors completely off the cover-up that the WNBA's leadership has been running on Caitlin Clark since the moment she stepped into this league.
Caitlin, I thought that she was treated rather rough, if you want to know the truth. That was a much different kind of an event.
I want every single person watching this video to understand the full weight of what just happened, because the mainstream conversation is skimming the surface, and we are going to go deeper. House Republicans, led by Representative August Pfluger, have formally announced that the Department of Justice and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission could crack down on the WNBA. Not a tweet, not a podcast clip. A formal, written, on-the-record letter addressed directly to Commissioner Cathy Engelbert. And the letter names Caitlin Clark by name. It names the incidents, it names the failure of WNBA officiating to hold anyone accountable. And it raises the possibility, explicitly, that what has been happening to Caitlin Clark on that court may constitute violations of federal civil rights law. Let me say that again so it sinks in for every single person watching. Federal civil rights law. That is not sports commentary. That is not a hot take. That is a formal government document addressed to the commissioner of a professional sports league. I have been documenting this pattern on this channel for weeks. I told you this was escalating. I told you the silence from the league office was going to cost them. If you missed my breakdown from last week where I walked through the specific incidents and the league's non-response, go check that video right now, because everything I laid out there is now the foundation of a congressional letter. Every single prediction I made is sitting in that document. Receipts are in the comments of that video. Before I get into the full breakdown of the letter, the Trump statement, and what Tiffany Hayes did on social media, I need you to understand the one detail that everybody covering this story is skipping. And I am going to get to it at the 9-minute mark, because that detail changes the entire frame of what comes next for this league. Stay with me.
If discrimination or retaliation is occurring and creating a hostile work...
Let me walk you through exactly what we are dealing with here, because the receipts are stacked, they are documented, and they are undeniable. Representative August Pfluger sent a formal letter to WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert. The letter opens by acknowledging what every honest observer already knows, that Caitlin Clark is transforming women's sports, that she has inspired a new generation of young girls to participate in athletics, that she has become one of the most influential figures in the history of women's basketball. The letter states directly that Clark is, quote, the face of your league. It acknowledges that she has significantly increased fan interest, driven record television ratings, and attracted new corporate sponsors for the WNBA. Millions of casual fans now tune in specifically to watch her play. And then, and this is where the letter turns, it states that what those millions of fans too often witness is not simply aggressive competition, but repeated acts of unnecessary physical hostility and violence. The letter lists the incidents with brutal surgical precision. Clark has been hip-checked, poked in the eye, struck in the throat during games. The letter states that these incidents go far beyond routine physical play, and then it delivers the most damning line in the entire document, that the WNBA and its officiating have too often failed to address these unacceptable incidents and hold players accountable. I want you to sit with that for a second. A group of United States House representatives just put in writing that the WNBA's officiating has failed. That is a federal document. That is not a fan forum. That is not a sports radio show. That is Congress telling the commissioner of a professional sports league that her officials are not doing their jobs. And the letter goes further. It notes that a player, and we will get to exactly who that player is in a moment, appeared to endorse violence against Clark in a social media post, further fueling concerns about the culture surrounding these incidents. The letter raises the possibility that many of these attacks against Caitlin Clark may be racially motivated, and it states clearly, if discrimination or retaliation is occurring and creating a hostile work environment, they support any appropriate investigation by the Department of Justice, the Department of Labor, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. If true, such conduct could constitute violations of federal civil rights law. I have been saying this for 3 videos straight. 3 videos. I told you the league's silence was not going to hold. I told you the pattern of incidents was too documented, too visible, too on camera to be ignored forever. And now we have a congressional letter making the same argument I have been making from this channel for weeks. Receipts are right there in my last 3 videos. Go back and check the timestamps. Now, don't take my word for it on what Congress actually put in that letter. Let me show you the most direct line in that entire document. Watch this.
If true, such conduct could institute violations of federal civil rights law.
They said it in a formal letter with their names attached. If true, such conduct could constitute violations of federal civil rights law. Let me say that back to you in the harshest, most accurate framing possible. Congress just told the WNBA that what is being done to Caitlin Clark on that basketball court may be a federal crime. That is what just happened. That is what Commissioner Kathy Engelbert woke up to. That is what the people who actually run this league are now sitting with. And the response from the WNBA's leadership, as of this recording, has been the same absolute, deafening, calculated silence we have come to expect from this organization every single time Caitlin Clark's name comes up in a context that is uncomfortable for them. The letter closes with a line that I think is the most important sentence in the entire document, and almost nobody is quoting it. It says the league has an extraordinary opportunity to inspire the next generation of female athletes, but that opportunity is undermined when its brightest stars are not adequately protected. Your fans deserve better, and so do the young girls who look to the WNBA as a model for excellence, sportsmanship, and opportunity. That is the framing, that is the argument. And that argument just went from sports commentary to a congressional letter to, potentially, a federal investigation. The escalation on this story is insane, and we are just getting started.
Caitlin, I thought that she was treated rather rough, if you want to know the truth. That was a much different kind of an event.
Now let me walk you through the 4 layers of what is actually happening here. Because this story has texture that the mainstream coverage is completely missing. Pass 1, the tactical failure. Let me be entirely clear about what the WNBA's leadership did wrong. Specifically, concretely, and on the record. When Alyssa Thomas struck Caitlin Clark in the throat, the incident was on camera, it was visible, it was documented. The league had every tool available to respond swiftly, decisively, and in a way that sent an unambiguous message about player safety. They chose not to. When Clark was hip-checked, an incident that Representative Pfluger specifically names in the congressional letter, the league had an opportunity to act. They chose not to. When Clark was poked in the eye during a game, the officiating crew on the floor had a responsibility to protect a player from unnecessary physical hostility. They chose not to. And Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, the person whose name is on that congressional letter, the person who has the authority and the obligation to set the standard for player safety in this league, has presided over every single one of these failures without issuing a response that comes anywhere close to matching the severity of what happened on that court. That is not a leadership failure, that is not an oversight, that is sabotage of the one player who is single-handedly keeping this league relevant to a mainstream audience. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert had every opportunity to get ahead of this. She ignored it every single time. Pass 2, the pattern of behavior. And here's what I need you to understand. This is not a one-time incident. This is not an isolated dust-up. This is a documented, repeated, escalating pattern. Caitlin Clark was hip-checked, that is in the congressional letter. Caitlin Clark was poked in the eye, that is in the congressional letter. Caitlin Clark was struck in the throat, that is in the congressional letter. 3 categories of physical incidents, 3 separate documented events, 3 times the WNBA and its officiating failed to hold anyone accountable. 3 times Commissioner Kathy Engelbert had a chance to act and chose silence instead. 3 incidents, 3 failures. 3 times Caitlin Clark paid the price for a league office that refused to protect its most important player. And I made a video on this pattern weeks ago. I broke down exactly why the league's non-response was going to compound the problem. Go check that video because every single thing I laid out there is now sitting inside a formal congressional document. The pattern was always there, I documented it, and the people who actually run this league chose to look away. Pass 3, the enabler complicity. Now let me talk about who else has been covering for this situation. Because Commissioner Kathy Engelbert does not operate in a vacuum. The WNBA's officiating crews are on the floor for every single one of these incidents. They have whistles, they have the authority to call flagrant fouls, to eject players, to send an unambiguous message that this level of physical hostility will not be tolerated. They chose not to use that authority. The congressional letter says it explicitly. The WNBA and its officiating have too often failed to address these unacceptable incidents. That is not just the commissioner. That is the entire officiating apparatus of the league. And then there is the social media dimension. Because the congressional letter specifically notes that a player appeared to endorse violence against Clark in a post. That player is Tiffany Hayes. Tiffany Hayes went on Threads, the platform, and posted content that the letter describes as endorsing violence against Caitlin Clark. And the league's response to that, silence. The same silence. The same calculated, deliberate, gutless non-response that has defined this organization's handling of the Caitlin Clark situation from the very beginning. And every single one of them stayed silent. The officiating crews, the league office, the social media team that monitors player conduct, receipts coming, and they are already in the congressional record. Pass 4. The cost to Caitlin Clark. Now let me be entirely precise about what Caitlin Clark has actually lost here, because the conversation always focuses on the league, on the villains, on the politics. But Caitlin Clark is the one who has to walk onto that court. She is the one who has absorbed a hip check, a poke in the eye, and a strike to the throat, and then had to go back out and play basketball at the highest level of the women's game, while the league that profits from her presence did nothing to protect her. She is the one who has had to perform at an extraordinary level, while a documented pattern of physical hostility was directed at her, while a player publicly endorsed violence against her on social media, and while the commissioner of her league stayed silent. Caitlin Clark has driven record television ratings for this league. She has attracted new corporate sponsors. She has brought millions of casual fans into the building and onto the broadcast. And what she has received in return from the WNBA's leadership is the most baffling, agonizing, soul-crushing institutional indifference I have ever seen a professional sports league display toward its own most valuable asset. That is what Caitlin Clark's prime is being burned for. An organization that refuses to protect her. Now, here is the receipt that nobody in mainstream sports media is playing for you. Because of what it proves about who is actually speaking up for Caitlin Clark at the highest level. Watch this.
If discrimination or retaliation is occurring and creating a hostile work...
The President of the United States called Caitlin Clark a young, wonderful basketball player and said, on camera, in front of reporters, that she was treated rather rough, and that it was a pretty bad event. He distinguished the Clark incident from an unrelated soccer situation by saying the soccer incident appeared to be an accident, and the Caitlin Clark situation appeared to be something very different. That is the sitting president of the United States publicly drawing a distinction between an accidental collision in another sport and what happened to Caitlin Clark on a WNBA court. That is where this story has arrived. That is the level of national attention that the WNBA's silence has now generated. The establishment that runs this league thought they could manage this. They thought they could wait it out. They couldn't believe the story kept growing. And now it has grown all the way to the Oval Office. Before I lay out the verdict, I need you to hear one more clip, because of what it proves about the specific language Congress used when they put this letter together. This is the line that should terrify Commissioner Cathy Engelbert more than anything else in that document. If discrimination or retaliation is occurring and creating a hostile work environment, we support any appropriate investigation by the Department of Justice, the Department of Labor, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. That is 3 separate federal agencies. 3 agencies that Congress is explicitly inviting to open an investigation into the WNBA. And the trigger for that investigation is the possibility that what is happening to Caitlin Clark on that court constitutes discrimination or retaliation, creating a hostile work environment. That is the legal frame. That is the language of federal employment law being applied to a professional basketball league. And that is what Commissioner Cathy Engelbert is now sitting across from. Now let me give you my 5 staked predictions, because this is where I put my credibility on the line, and this is where you come back and roast me or confirm me in the comments. Prediction 1. Commissioner Cathy Engelbert's position becomes untenable before the end of this WNBA season. I am going on record right now. If Engelbert is still in the commissioner's chair by the time this season concludes without issuing a substantive, documented response to the congressional letter, not a press release, not a spokesperson statement, but a real, measurable policy response, the pressure from the league's own corporate sponsors will force a leadership conversation. The people who actually run this league from a financial standpoint cannot afford a federal investigation. They will act, and Engelbert will either act with them or be replaced by someone who will. If she is still in that chair with no meaningful action taken, come back to this video and roast me in the comments. I will take it. Prediction 2. Caitlin Clark's next documented incident on the court, the next time she absorbs unnecessary physical contact that goes uncalled, becomes the single most watched sports clip in America within 24 hours. The national attention on this situation has now reached a level where every single play involving Clark is under a microscope. The next incident does not get buried, it gets amplified by Congress, by the White House, by every outlet that has been covering this story. Save this clip. Prediction 3. The WNBA announces a formal player conduct review process, specifically addressing physical play, and they announce it in language that is directly traceable to the Pfluger letter. They are not going to call it a response to Congress. They are going to frame it as a league initiative. But the timing and the specific language will make the connection undeniable. Watch the next 2 weeks for that announcement. Prediction 4. The story breaks wider when a major national outlet runs a reported piece, not an opinion column, a reported piece with sourcing, specifically examining the WNBA's internal handling of the Clark incidents and the officiating decisions that were made, or not made, in real time. That story is already being reported. The sources are already talking. The article is coming. When it drops, everything in this video becomes the foundation for the next layer of the conversation. Prediction 5. This congressional letter becomes a turning point that is referenced in every serious analysis of the WNBA's trajectory for the next 3 years. Not because the investigation necessarily happens, but because the letter exists, because it is in the congressional record, because a group of United States representatives formally put in writing that a professional women's sports league may have created a hostile work environment for its most important player. That does not disappear. That document follows this league. It follows Commissioner Kathy Engelbert. It follows every executive who was in that office when these incidents occurred and chose silence. Mark this video, and here is the closing truth that I need every single person watching to sit with. Caitlin Clark, right now, today, is still walking onto that court. She is still playing basketball. She is still breaking records and driving ratings and bringing fans into this sport who had never watched a WNBA game before she arrived. She is doing all of that while Congress writes letters about the way she has been treated, while the President of the United States calls her a young, wonderful basketball player and says publicly that what happened to her was pretty bad, while a sitting player endorsed violence against her on social media and faced no meaningful consequence. Caitlin Clark is doing the thing that every single person who has tried to diminish her, target her, and dismiss her said she could not sustain. She is still here, she is still playing, and now she has the federal government of the United States in her corner. The people who thought they could run her out of this league made the most catastrophic miscalculation in the history of women's professional basketball. And the receipts are now sitting in a congressional document. My apologies, I just get so passionate when I see an institution this deliberately, ruthlessly indifferent to the safety of its own most important player. This irks my nerves at a level I cannot fully articulate, but that passion is exactly why I am going to keep documenting every single development on this story until the WNBA's leadership is held accountable. Here is what I need from you right now. Drop your most honest take in the comments. Is the WNBA's leadership genuinely incapable of protecting Caitlin Clark? Or is this a deliberate, calculated decision to let the hostility run because they do not want to alienate the players who are doing it? Pick a side, defend it. I want to see the argument you bring. And while you are down there, save this comment. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert issues a formal, documented policy response to the Pfluger letter before this WNBA season ends. That is my prediction. If I am right, come back and tell me. If I am wrong, come back and roast me. Either way, I want you in that comment section. Tag the friend who keeps telling you this story is overblown, make them watch this video and tell you they still believe the WNBA's leadership has handled the Caitlin Clark situation responsibly. I want to see that conversation happen right here, and here is what is coming next on this channel. Tomorrow we are going to break down the specific social media post from Tiffany Hayes, exactly what she said, exactly why the league's non-response to that post is now part of the congressional record, and exactly what it means for player conduct standards going forward. If you are not subscribed, you are going to miss that video. Hit the bell right now. This is Rim Run. We will see you in the next video.